Tonight's video features 3 stories you were never meant to hear. These aren't ghost tales or urban legends. These are real encounters from real people who lived through something they can't explain. Settle in, because once these stories start, you'll feel like you're right there with them. Story 1. The air tasted like pennies and ozone. Just west of Woodward, Oklahoma, the sky had liquefied into a bruised, sickening green that swallowed the remaining daylight. I was parked on a deserted gravel road, the engine of the tank idling hard, the truck rattling against the inflow winds. My focus was pinned to the laptop, sweat stinging my eyes. The GR Level 3 radar feed was screaming. "Alex, look at this shear," I muttered to the empty cab, adjusting the angle cursor. A perfect textbook hook echo was forming, but the reflectivity, dBz readings were impossibly dense. Too tight, too hot, even for an EF4 in the making. But it wasn't the rotation that made my blood cold. It was the anomaly nested right in the mesocyclone's center, a stable, persistent speck of high reflectivity that wasn't rotating with the storm. It was stationary, like the entire vortex was wrapping itself around a fixed point. It wasn't ground clutter. Ground clutter moves. This held still, 1,500 feet above the deck. A shudder ran through the truck as the rear flank downdraft, RFD, hit. The pressure drop was immediate, sucking the air out of my lungs. The roaring siren from my dash-mounted weather radio began its electronic wail, a sound that always feels less like a warning and more like a final judgment. I forced the door open, the wind trying to peel it off the hinges. I grabbed the high-speed camera rig and braced myself against the doorframe. The wall cloud was massive, dripping gray condensation, churning like wet concrete. Inside the churning, I saw the debris cloud starting to spin up. Dust, wheat chaff, chunks of field defining the vortex already near the ground. Then I saw the spike. It wasn't wind-borne. It was impossibly high, a pillar of absolute blackness that seemed to predate the storm itself. It stood inside the nascent tornado funnel, utterly untouched by the incredible winds that were ripping up the landscape 50 yards away. It was leaning. No, it wasn't leaning. It was watching. It was the size of a telephone pole, but it was shaped like a man. Too tall, too gaunt, entirely featureless against the sickly light. The debris field, the shattered timber and dust that formed the visible cone of the tornado, seemed to be swirling out from its base, not past it. It was the eye of the storm, but not in the way physics understood. I realized with a crushing, paralyzing terror. The stable anomaly I saw on the radar, the fixed point the entire monster was rotating around, wasn't a weather feature. It was that. The sound changed instantly, transforming from a roar to an impossibly deep, vibrating thrum that resonated in my teeth and bones, a sound that felt less like air moving and more like the ground screaming. The figure tilted its head, and for one horrifying second, I felt an awareness, a focused presence directed entirely at me, miles away and insignificant. I slammed the truck into drive, tires spitting gravel. I wasn't chasing the storm anymore. I was fleeing whatever stable terror it had decided to carry. I didn't stop until I hit Elk City, 2 counties over. I never looked at that footage again. Every time I boot up the radar now, I look for fixed points, stable signatures that shouldn't exist. Because I know now that some storms aren't just weather events. They're vehicles for things that require total chaos to hide in plain sight. And they settle around whatever they choose to consume. Story 2. The sky over Ochiltree County, Texas, was the color of old bruises. It was 3:17 p.m., and the air was dead. A thick, chemical quiet that choked the engine sound of the Dreadnought, our armored chase vehicle. This wasn't a standard chase. My partner, Ben, swore the GR3 velocity profile was lying to us. We were sitting 5 miles due south of the mesocyclone's clearest inflow notch, and the correlation coefficient, CC data, was absolute garbage. "Look, Jack," Ben pointed, his finger trembling slightly on the touchscreen. "The hook echo is perfect, but near the center of rotation, the CC is dropping to 0.1, 0.0. It's not seeing rain, It's not seeing hail, and it's not seeing lofted debris. Then what the hell is it seeing? I muttered, wiping sweat off the steering wheel. A few seconds later, the world ended. The town's siren of Periton went off. Not the usual slow wail, but a rapid, piercing shriek that sounded like an animal being flayed. The wind hit us instantly, a 40-degree temperature drop, smelling like spilled battery acid and damp earth. "We have to bail, Jack. This thing is accelerating too fast." But the chaser's instinct, that terrible, fatal curiosity, had me already turning the wheel. I had to sample the vorticity, had to feel the core. I drove straight into the wall of precipitation. Visibility dropped to nothing. The sound wasn't the roar of a jet engine. It was a rhythmic grinding noise, like granite blocks being crushed together, punctuated by the high-pitched structural whine of the dreadnought's chassis being stressed. We were inside the debris cloud. "Ben, brace! We're too deep!" The pressure differential was physical, pushing the air out of my lungs. I squinted through the reinforced windshield. Gravel, soil, and insulation ripped past us in a chaotic brown maelstrom. Then, the lightning flashed. It wasn't a sheet flash. It was a single, instantaneous stroke that illuminated the immediate 10 feet in front of the truck. And I saw it. It wasn't a funnel. It wasn't debris. Taller than the truck, rising out of the churning earth and disappearing into the black ceiling, was a presence. It was impossibly dark, a flawless, absolute black that swallowed light, yet it had a defined shape, cylindrical and segmented, like bone or hardened chitin. It was moving, but not rotating with the wind. It was carving its own path, slow and deliberate, scraping against the flow. Ben screamed, a raw, choking sound I'd never heard from him. The thing was too close. I didn't see features, just the scale of it. It radiated an energy that felt less like weather and more like intentional weight. I slammed the truck into reverse, tires spinning uselessly for a second before they caught purchase on the pulverized asphalt. We rocketed backwards, away from the grinding, towering shadow. We burst out of the core moments later, the air instantly clearing. The storm was already half a mile away, moving east at 60 miles per hour, leaving only the sound of receding hail and the persistent, chilling whine of the Periton siren. We sat there, shivering in the sudden calm. "What was that?" Ben whispered, his face white, eyes fixed on the empty space where the storm had been. I didn't answer. I just looked at the GR3 display. Near the center of the now moving circulation, the correlation coefficient was still pinned at 0. Something vast and solid was moving through the Texas panhandle, and our radar couldn't classify what it was hitting. I've been chasing 30 years. I've seen F5s flatten towns. But I had never seen a storm that felt like it was being piloted. And I know, with cold, stark certainty, that if we had sampled that core 1 second longer, the dreadnought wouldn't have been classified as debris. It would have been classified as nothing. Story 3. The air tasted like aluminum and ozone. We were parked 5 miles east of the 54 overpass, Kansas, waiting for the mesocyclone to tighten. My partner, Jen, was white-knuckled on the dash cam, but I was focused solely on the laptop screen, the radar feed glowing sickly green in the oppressive twilight of the truck cab. The hook echo was perfect, textbook geometry for an EF4+, but the velocity data was wrong. "Look at the sheer value of that couplet, Jen," I mumbled, tapping the screen. "It's registering 180 knots rotational velocity, at 1,500 feet AGL. That's absurd. And the CC, the correlation coefficient, is 0. Absolute 0. So it's rotating that fast, but hitting nothing?" Jen whispered. "It's rotating that fast, but scattering no physical debris yet. It's like the wind itself is spinning, untouched." A moment later, the sky opened up. Not rain, but a sudden dense curtain of hail the size of golf balls, sounding like 100 hammers striking the roof of the armored truck. The world outside turned a toxic, sickly shade of jade. Then, the siren started. Not the distant, mournful howl of a town siren, but the immediate warped scream of the industrial one directly across the fields. It sounded too close, too loud, vibrating the dashboard, a panicked, metallic bleating announcing inevitable destruction. I slammed the truck into drive, accelerating hard down the deserted county road, aiming for the perfect intercept position. The hail stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. In the sudden, blinding flash of a distant lightning strike, I saw it. It wasn't a funnel. Not yet. It was a churning column of blackness, broader than any tornado I'd ever chased, tearing the red dirt immediately beneath its base. But floating beneath the ragged, boiling wall cloud, just above the ground scour, was something tall. It was impossibly thin, a stretched skeletal silhouette against the swirling darkness. It didn't move with the wind. It listed against it. It was too tall to be a person, too defined to be a debris chute. It looked like a figure, motionless and upright, observing. Jen gasped, a strangled sound of utter disbelief. "What is that? Alex, what is that?" I pulled the vehicle to a screeching halt, grabbing the 4K camera. My hands were shaking so violently I couldn't steady the lens. The figure remained, a static, unmoving blot in the dynamic chaos of the supercell's heart. It didn't belong to physics. It belonged to something else entirely. The wind hit us then, a colossal physical shove that rattled the truck's frame and blew out the driver's side window shield with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. Through the new gap, I heard a sound that was not the siren, and not the roar of the wind. It was a resonant, low-frequency hum, deep in the chest, the sound of unimaginable pressure vibrating against bone. It felt less like sound, and more like a warning, a pulse of dark energy radiating from the tall shadow. I didn't wait for the camera to focus. I threw the truck into reverse, blindingly fast, leaving the scientific pursuit behind. The horror wasn't the tornado itself. The horror was that thing standing at its core, utterly indifferent to the rotational forces that should have shredded it. It knew we were watching, and it was waiting for the perfect wind to deliver it. I drove until the humming stopped, and the green light of the radar screen felt like the only safe thing left in the world. I still have the footage. The shadow figure is there, indelible, and the data registers impossible rotation. But when I play the audio, the terrifying hum is gone. Just static. Whatever it was, it didn't want to be recorded, only glimpsed and remembered.